All right, Zig coming in at the top. Today on the show we have Richard X Heyman, a singer-songwriter and drummer who you might know from various outlets, one of which is his expansive solo career under the name Richard X Heyman, which has now 14 albums. And his first one, Living Room, Rolling Stone magazine proclaimed as an undiscovered treasure. Richard has a dense career. He also plays drums with the New Jersey group, the Doughboys, a very noted group who disbanded and got back together. And in between, each member had a very successful career endeavor on their own part. Along with Richard, the lead singer of the Doughboys ended up singing for Ram Jam. You know, the group who does Black Betty. But yeah, so Richard was really insightful to talk to in a career that was very dense, and it was hard to even grapple all the twists and turns that it had to navigate this conversation. But he has a new album out called Copious Notes, or a new album that's almost out. They have a Kickstarter going, and if you donate to the Kickstarter, you get all these really cool insights to the album, how the album is made. He's recording all these alternative takes, so to say, of like an a cappella version or a solo piano version or a stripped down acoustic version of all the songs that are on the album. There's something sonically pleasing about hearing one thing as a completed whole than seeing it taken apart and then put back together, I think. Also, there's an interactive component with like some interviews and some insights. Definitely check it out if you go to richardxheyman.com. It's right on the front page. You can learn how you can help out there. We were going to listen to a track off the record. This is the last track, Greater Good, off Copious Notes.
Discovered, reflecting back from her eyes, that there's a brighter way to be than reaching for some prize. And we've uncovered the secret behind it all. Yeah, to the eye to every stone from the dividing wall. Share. It's within us now. If we don't despair, a brand new day is close at hand. Happens overnight like falling sand. What we've been through will be overcome. If we do our part, we can reach the sun of the greater good.
Greater Good off the album Copious Notes, Richard X Heyman. Before we get any further, this podcast is mixed by Studio 44 CLE. Studio 44 CLE for any of your video, streamed, or audio needs. You can have Jay Sparrow at studio44cleveland at gmail.com or Studio44 Cleveland on the Facebook, and he'll make your stuff sound good. Lastly, if you can like, rate, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on all the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to insightful people like Richard and sharing those insights with you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Richard X Heyman. All right. Is that so? We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, perfect. So what got you, was there music in the family?
Not overtly. My father played trumpet
Okay.
when he was young, and that was pretty much the only direct musical influence in the family. But my mother and father, both loved to listen to music, so there were a lot of records just to listen to, mainly big band, jazz, and Broadway shows and things like that. But I had three older sisters as well, so they brought in all the rock and roll stuff, and I started to hear the rock and pop albums through my sisters and singles. And then they had their boyfriends would come over, and there'd be parties, and records would be left. And I started to hear a lot of R&B and soul music from stuff that was just left around the living room.
Nice. It's always the older siblings that bring the cool stuff in. What was like a
Yeah, I know. I got turned on to like James Brown and
Nice.
Ike and Tina Turner Review, all these great things I would have never known about as a kid. But they were just lying around, and I'd just stick them on the turntable and see what they were, and I was like, wow, I like this.
That's the beauty of like the record or the CD. Someone has to show it to you. It's not algorithmically placed in your ear holes. You got to like find it, and then it means a little bit more coming from somewhere, I think.
Yeah, it's for sure. Yeah. It's a mixture of just kind of seeking it out and happenstance.
Right.
These things just happen to be there, and they caught my attention, and I was already drawn to music anyway. So it just kind of expanded my interests and my influences as well.
Did the big band stuff click?
For sure, I listened to a lot of Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and all these Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and I was drawn to that as a drummer because that was my first instrument.
Right. And you started
And
drumming
that
like
kind
at
of
5, right?
yeah, that kind of jazz drumming just seemed to come naturally to me. And when I got my first drum set, I just sat down and started playing it in that style. I don't know where it came from.
Nice. Did you take lessons, or was this all just playing by the record?
I took some initial lessons, didn't particularly take. I mean, I know my fundamentals in music and basics, but I wouldn't say I was a trained, schooled musician, but I certainly learned from, a couple of private lessons, and I took any music courses I could through school.
Gotcha.
I was in the marching band.
Oh, okay. All right. So you could read, you know?
Yeah, I could, the basic stuff.
Right. Well, the basics that's the building blocks of everything. And if you
Yeah.
can make the basics work for you, you can make anything work.
But I wouldn't say that it's necessary for pop rock musicians. Just have to look at the Beatles to know that.
Right.
So there's a kind of a natural instinct that takes over in pop music that can go beyond the actual structural learning of notes on paper.
I agree with that. Well, that's why popular. That's why more people can lock onto it, because you're not like, oh, this isn't seven, this is hip. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah, I know.
justifying.
I love the fact that it's so visceral. I mean, I listen to music and I try to forget sometimes about the knowledge of what I'm hearing, you know, because if you sometimes get too technical, it gets in the way of the enjoyment of just the emotion it can bring to you. So I like to forget about that. And I find when something's really good, that happens naturally. It could be just one chord or three chords, and I don't even want to think that they're going from, you know, the one to the four. I just feel it.
Right. Well, it's interesting the more you learn about something, being able to separate yourself from it and fully enjoy it for what it is, how other people hear it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at the tree in the forest.
Yes, that's the beauty of music. And there's two aspects. There's putting it out and performing it, and then there's the listening.
Right.
And two different things sometimes. 'Cause I find that sometimes when I'm performing, I've got to remind myself, you know, to really listen, because you get so wrapped up in doing it
Right.
that you forget that whole part of you got to really listen not only to yourself but other players around you and what's happening.
Well, when you put leading up to the show, right? So you had to book it, you had to write the music. All this stuff goes into the 2% of the career, which is playing music, which is why you're in it, right?
Right.
The promotion and everything. So, and you're reading the room, and like it's crazy how that kind of goes to the wayside. All these other things cloud your mind, and you should just be listening to what's happening and going with the flow
Yeah.
of the group. And that can easily be super overshot if it's, I don't know, if it's a rough night, or there was a fight with the owner coming in, or the drummers
Yeah.
uh, forgot the
Yeah.
hi-hat stand and it's moving.
Yeah. I've been through it all as
I
far as
can imagine.
the logistics of gigs and all that stuff. Carrying a Hammond B3 organ up 3 flights of steps, you know, with the Leslie speaker. I've done all that stuff.
And being a drummer in the band, you got used to carrying everything.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, first, you know, you just gotta get it out of your residence into the car.
Right.
That's a whole word. And then, you know, you need a car that can fit, especially as the drum sets got bigger and bigger. Because I went through a period at one point where I was using double bass drum, double, triple toms, and I had
Right.
so many drums I could barely fit them in the car. And then at one point I started getting bigger drums. So I literally had a 28-inch
Jeez.
bass drum at one time.
It looked cool. It sounded loud.
Yeah, it looked great. It just was like sitting behind a Mack truck. It just felt powerful sitting behind this huge bass drum. But now, in the past several years, I've settled on a 24-inch bass drum. It just seemed just the right size. I was kind of influenced by a couple of favorite drummers. One was Dino Danelli from the Young Rascals,
Nice.
Rascals now. And, of course, Buddy Rich used a 24. He's a big hero.
Coming from the big band era, that's the guy. You know, that's the drummer of drummers. Like,
Yeah, there's
even
no argument.
all the rock guys go back to him. Like, there's something to that shift from like big band and jazz to rock, and like the time where like those groups were still on top, kind of, and lingering with each other. Did you run into that switching over, like kind of starting with jazz and getting influenced by rock? Was there a time like that?
Yeah, well, first, a lot of the drummers that influenced me, a lot of them that were British, you could tell that they had a bit of a jazz background. You know, Charlie Watts, of course.
Right.
And a big influence on me was Mitch Mitchell, who played with Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And he's like very kind of...
Very jazzy.
Very jazzy and like JoJo Jones. He just had chops, like, and you could he played a lot of the time with traditional grip, which I still do. I go back and forth between match grip and traditional grip.
Yeah.
There's just certain things I can do better with the traditional grip that modern drummers don't even attempt. They don't even know how to do it.
It's an interesting like switch over. Is there what do you use like match grip for then? If traditional is kind of like your
Sometimes if I'm just really walloping the backbeat and I want to play with the butt of the stick, I turn it around and I just do match grip. I find with the traditional grip, I usually use the stick in the right position with the head on the drum, not the butt of the stick. It just seems a little too weighty for my fingers. But back to what you were saying though, there was definitely a crossover for me, starting as a jazz drummer and then being influenced by the rock drummers, but at the same time trying to keep those jazz chops up and incorporate them into my rock playing and vice versa, because there's things in both worlds that can be very useful.
right, and like it's almost like with the jazz approach, you're moving light years be kind of beyond the rock approach, and it's almost like dialing back in a way to not overdo it. So there's like, it seems like to mix the jazz into the rock in the right way, there's like this fine line of too flashy or where's that coming from, or too hip, maybe that's the way to put it, in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a easy kind of medium to find, or are you still working on it?
I am very emotionally attached to music, and it just makes me there's this visceral response as I'm playing or listening, and it's whatever it is, it just moves me a certain way, because a lot of times you hear drummers and they'll be playing a backbeat and then they'll put a fill in, and you'll say, okay, why is he putting a fill there? And for me, the answer is because the music told him to do it. It just moved me as a listener and player to add something extra there. And sometimes people look at fills as playing busy, but I think of them more as just accentuating, the dynamics, especially if it's the right kind of fill and it's working for the song. And it's the old cliche that everything should be in the service of the song, and I'm certainly a song-oriented person as far as my musicianship is definitely towards the song,
right?
Trying to aid the song.
So when did that mindset come into play? Like there's one step from like learning to express yourself with the instrument, right, which was drums. When did the songscape, right, being able to see the song as a whole kind of click? Was that when you started playing with bands, or was that like kind of just a process of learning the drums?
Well, you have to, it was definitely with playing with the bands and just learning from others. I mean, in the very early days, I would play along with some of the big band records, and so you got that structure under your belt. And then when rock and roll started to really become the main thing that I was involved with, you just learn from your influences. And then the beauty of it is you hear all these different people playing, and then you start to think, okay, what is it that I can contribute that's my own thing? And if you're lucky, all those different influences sort of become part of your own stamp, and you take, you kind of put a little twist on it, and it becomes your own thing.
Right. No, I think that's key, is wearing your influences on your sleeve in a way to like show who you are, because that's what moved you.
Yeah, there's that fine line, where you don't want to totally copy,
Right.
but you have to be influenced. So at first, maybe you just do what you've heard, and then you kind of mix it up a little bit and change it around. And you're doing something that nobody else did exactly like that before. And it's one of the pleasures of creating.
So, in high school, you were playing in like jazz, a big band. When did the Ascots come around?
I started that with a friend of mine, Mike Crusoe, who's a bass player. And I was literally like, I think 12. I was like
Yeah.
12 or 13. And that evolved into the same band, but we changed it into the Doughboys, and we were doing a lot of kind of what I guess you'd call garage rock,
Nice.
which
What?
was like a kind of more raw R&B side of rock. Even though I was a closeted Beatle fan within the band, because we weren't a real melodic band, it was more towards the R&B, so I had a lot of kind of melodic pop instincts that I kind of had to keep to myself for a while.
That's interesting. It's definitely. So, was there like a click a lineup change or anything that went from Ascot to Doughboys, or was it just like we need a different name, or was it just like the time in between?
What happened was we had a manager at the time, and he came up with the name the Doughboys, and he thought it would be like a little gimmick for us to wear World War I uniforms, World War I Army uniforms.
Oh, okay.
And guys in the Army in World War I were called Doughboys.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from, and we did that because we were told to do it by this guy who was our manager, and we just went along with it. But the band was basically the same. I mean, there were some personnel changes. We started as a 4-piece, and we went up to a 5-piece. Then we started dwindling back down to become a 3-piece at one point, like a power trio.
Right. And was that
And then,
did that change
I'm
names?
sorry, go ahead.
When you went down to a 3-piece, was that a different band?
No, it was still called the Doughboys.
Oh, okay.
But it was the same, Mike and I were the rhythm section, and we had this guy, Willie, on guitar, who was the same guitarist from the beginning.
That's great. That's crazy that to start playing at 12 and still be, you know, like the lifespan of bands isn't quite that long. Like you usually get like 5 years, and then someone moves somewhere, or something shifts to something, someone has a kid.
Yeah, well, when it was all very local, we were all friends, and we lasted through. I was in junior high school, and we lasted until everybody started to graduate, and then people did drift off, and you get into your late teens and early 20s, and then I started expanding and playing with a bunch of different people, and then eventually I moved from New Jersey down to Maryland, and that's where I hooked up with Link Wray and got that gig
Okay.
down in Virginia.
So, when at that point, before you moved to Maryland, were you picking up the guitar and the piano and starting to write your own songs?
Yeah, I started noodling on the piano very early, and just kind of learned some basic chords. And the guitar was a little tougher for me, because as a drummer, you use your hands in a totally different way than the guitarist. And I
Right.
just couldn't fathom how people could form these chords with their fingers. It just didn't come natural to me. And I had somebody sit and really teach me how to go from G to C to D, and I just kind of slowly did it, and then you keep doing it, and one day it starts to click, and you got your basic folk chords, and then from there you learn your bar chords, and somebody will show you, oh, here's how you play a diminished chord, or here's a 7th chord.
Right. You build the
And
repertoire.
so, chords keep coming at you from different sources. And then, in my case, from all the listening of music I did, I just kind of felt I could, take a crack at writing my own songs, which I would do. And I really enjoyed putting together chord progressions, especially ones that I hadn't heard before.
And you have an interesting array of like your music's. I mean, you mentioned how you had these melodic ideas. Your solo records are very melodic, and all the song structures have like these like I don't 4-part harmonies a lot of the times, not all of them, but there's all
Yeah.
this lush harmony and all this movement that's happening within your songs, and like that comes from like looking at. I'd imagine it comes from looking at the chords within it and building up and finding those voices that fit. Like, so to have that kind of in your head as you're figuring out these chords, is that expanding your like kind of melodic ideas and repertoire, learning some of these new chords and these new voices, or is it just kind of like
Uh,
making clear what you've been hearing?
yeah, I don't really think it through that much
Okay.
intellectually at all. I like I said, it's very emotional for me,
Right.
and so I just kind of hear ideas in my head, and I'll start adding the harmonies I'm hearing without really analyzing it too much. I mean, I know technically what they are, but I don't really stress over, oh, this should be this or this should be that. I just do it, whatever, sometimes it could be a second that sounds dissonant until you put the fifth in there, and all of a sudden you have this cluster that's working, or things develop. It's just kind of about making, the song work where it feels good, as far as, adding, various notes to harmony parts.
Because harmony's always interested me in trying to like figure out how that works. Like, I went to Cleveland State for music, right? And you learn the traditional 4-part harmony movement, and that always kind of
Mhm.
kind of blew my brain a little bit when you add seventh chords in there. Then there's all these rules, right? And like when you listen to records, it's like I don't I don't know that can't have been the process for that. It's interesting, like
Yeah.
how music is so thought out and written out and clear, but at the same time so vague and felt. Like to
Yeah.
have the
Right.
duality of that.
I mean, I listen to something like the Four Freshmen or even the Beach Boys, and I just can't even imagine
Right.
what's going on there. It's a whole other set of harmonies that I would never think of. So, there's all kinds of ideas floating around that, there's certain things you listen to and you can pick up on it, and then there's others that are, to me, I still not sure. If I'm listening to the Four Freshmen type harmonies, what's going on there?
Right. And it goes by so quick, and you can only latch onto one thing, maybe
Yeah,
two, as you're like, wait, what's that?
yeah, it's very complex. So I tend to not think about it too much as far as my own harmony structures. I just put in the next note, and I'm doing it all myself, so I can
Right.
build up each harmony, and a lot of it's trial and error.
Makes sense.
Not everything works out in
Yeah.
the beginning, especially when you're recording. And the good thing is that it's wrong, and you
Right.
know it's right.
I mean, but still, like sometimes you can get caught looking at that tree as opposed to you can get tunnel vision in the self-recording process and maybe not hear that note that's wrong and be building up all this other stuff around it, and you still got that sour note in there. Is there like, do you have like a process of like getting to a point with a thing and then exiting the tunnel to come back and be like, what was I tracking? This is nonsense, and start over?
uh,
Do you have like a,
well, I work with my wife Nancy. She's engineering. She's a very talented musician and plays bass on a lot of my newer recordings. So it's like a little team. So she's listening as well. And between the two of us, I think we know if something's going terribly wrong, which they do. Sometimes things have to be brought back to the blackboard and the drawing board, as I say.
Yeah.
But it's part of the process. Sometimes it's hard work, sometimes it's fun. But the main thing is, it's like with pitch.
Yeah.
It's the note's got to be the note, and there's no question about that.
Yeah.
So if you're not hearing that, you're in big trouble. Nancy will tell me, that's flat, that's not good, and she'll make me do it again until it's right.
Right.
And so that's the process of getting everything as close to in time and in tune as possible.
To have someone to do checks and balances with, and that makes it a way, I think, more achievable process than like being in there by yourself doing it. And it's interesting because when you're singing, right, it's coming out of you. It's hard to hear back, even though you got cans on, and like.
Yep.
It
gets. I can tell you, it gets worse with age.
Oh no.
I don't hear as well as I used to, and so. But I hear, when it's played back
right.
to me, then I hear it as clear as day. Oh yeah, that's definitely flat. So the good thing is that I hear that, and I'm not going to let that slide.
Right. Well, and
it's got to be in tune, and it's got to be in time, or it just sounds too amateurish, and it's not going to be enjoyable for the listener.
Right. Well, and it's going on wax. Like, this is the take you have to live with. You only get one shot to put the song out in the way it should be put out, and if you let it slide, you just always hear that mistake.
Yeah, no, I couldn't live with that. I mean, that's the beauty of recording at home now. You don't have to worry about the clock and the money, and you just get it right. Or at least as right as you can. You're never going to get it totally right, or you're never going to reach any sort of perfection.
Well, when did so that's the Kit Factory, right? That's what you call the home studio?
Yeah.
So when did the Kit Factory come? Like, I guess as far as like, that has to make sense. Like, just having your own place to do it. A lot of people, I think that's the goal. And then to learn all the things that go into doing recording yourself is a whole nother thing. But like, when did that become an idea and come to fruition that we're going to have this studio at home?
I had a couple major label deals, and I was going into the big studios in L.A. and here in New York, and there's always this concern about the budget and the red light going on. And it was fun, and somebody else was paying for it, basically.
Right.
Of course, in the end, you're paying for it, really. But when I went back to just doing independent records, the technology was starting to change, and there was a period where ADATs came in, and I don't know if you remember the ADATs, but they were 8-track recording players that used VHS tape.
Right.
And so we got a couple of ADATs, and that was our first experience as far as home recording. And we added a third one, and so basically had like a 16-track studio. And we just learned how to do, which was basically analog style recording, though it was technically digital because it was going on to these ADATs. But there was no computer involved. And then the computer came in and everything went digital, and so we got into that. And luckily Nancy's smarter than I am, and she figured out how to engineer and do all this stuff. We use Logic Pro, and so we have that set up in our bedroom. And I still have to go in to a regular studio to do the drum tracks because we live in an apartment.
Oh, okay.
So we would get ourselves thrown out of here if we tried to do drum tracks. As it is, I had to build a semi-soundproof box for guitar parts.
Right.
It's like a wooden box
Yeah.
with insulation and a speaker inside with a microphone. And then I have a regular Fender amp as my head, as my power source, and it's going into the speaker inside the box.
Oh, cool. And so it's all like you can kind of crank it a little bit and it's muffled.
Yeah, it's, I would say, I don't know if it's half the volume or three-quarters of the volume, but it's much softer than it would be if the amp was just out in the room. So we've gotten away with that. We haven't had any complaints, so
Nice.
that's good.
That's
And,
an achievement of all achievements.
Yeah.
To rock and roll and the neighbors
And-
still be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're hearing it, but it's not as nearly as loud as it would be. And then we have the bass going direct usually, and
Yeah.
the vocals, of course, aren't a problem. So yeah, we do everything in our bedroom after the drums are recorded. And, just do the whole build up, like the layer cake method. Start with the drums. I usually put just a simple chord instrument down, either a guitar or a keyboard to sing to, and I just start working on the vocals first thing, get them out of the way.
Right. Vocals always seem to be the hardest part. And
yeah, I like to just have them down, hear them against the drums and the chord progression, and then I can sort of sit back and listen and start envisioning what the track should be from that point.
now, when you go before a track's even recorded, are you writing by coming up with the lyrics first? Are you a chord or chord progression, or is it a melody? What for you writing style wise? What is it that kind of starts the song?
It's chords first.
Chords first.
Usually chords, if I'm lucky, chords and a melody kind of together. I would say at least 90% of the time that's the way I write. I just kind of sit at the piano or guitar and have my chord progression worked out and the melody. And then the hard part for me is sitting down, coming up with an idea for what the lyrics should be, and then having to execute that. And it's like doing a homework assignment at that point. Just got to get done, and I try to do the best I can and keep a certain standard. I don't want to just kind of put throwaway lyrics in. I have to work at it.
Right. Well, it definitely pays off because I've been going through your catalog, which is dense. You got 14 albums now. I know the 14th isn't out yet, and they're not short albums. You know what I mean? They're lengthy. They're not 8 songs per album with a lot of jamming in between. These are all written songs, and you do an excellent job of kind of like this Ernest Hemingway approach, right? Where you tell a story with 6 words type deal. At least that's what I've noticed as I've been going through your catalog. Taking a song even Out of My Hands, right? So just that title by itself, and then how you expand on it within the verses that go up to the chorus is expertly done. So the homework pays off.
Oh, good. Well, that's good to know. I'm happy to hear that.
As far as the amount of output, do you have a creative routine you do? I've been talking with some people and trying to everyone has kind of the practice routine of keeping the chops up, but not too many people expand upon their creative practice routine, because I think it's something that also needs to be practiced. You can't just write 14 albums worth of stuff. There's plenty of stuff in between the stuff that you don't hear. So that means you have to be writing a lot, or at least attempting to write that a lot. Is there a routine?
Well, again, I have a partner in Nancy, and it's funny you bring this up because I was just writing a little essay about, we have a song right now that's from the new album that we just kind of put out on our Kickstarter campaign, and I was writing a little bit about how I wrote the song, and I was talking about how I'll be noodling on the piano all the time, trying to come up with different ideas, and every now and then, I would say maybe 5% of the time of these noodlings, Nancy will stick her head in the door and say, "What is that?" And when she says that, I know that she thinks this is one that needs to be demoed before I forget it, because I will forget the other 95%. They just kind of come and go. I used to demo everything, and then I got to the point where I have like literally 5,000 cassettes that are obsolete now, probably sitting in drawers with song ideas on them. And so I only demo ones that, catch her attention, because I have to rely on somebody beside myself. Every now and then I'll have one that I insist upon. No, we got to demo this one. Just trust me on this. It's going to work out. And we do that too. So I do just a piano demo of a new idea, and then from there I start to think of it in terms of a song. How can I turn this piano instrumental into a vocal song?
Gotcha. So if that makes the cut, it gets to go up to the next process of it.
Right.
That's in.
And
as far as like noodling, do you have like a routine? Like I sit down every day for an hour and noodle, or like, is it just when it happens?
yeah, it's just when it happens.
Okay.
I was just writing in this essay today how after my last album, which was called Pop Circles, we
Right, which is a good pun on crop
put
circles.
that out. I don't know the exact time we put it out, but right after that, I experienced what I guess you'd call complete burnout.
Mm.
And I had lost all desire to write or to release, to record. I just didn't have any interest in it. And it wasn't even a case of writer's block or anything like that. I just felt spent. Just
Right.
didn't want to do it. There's enough music out there, and we work so hard on each project, and then they come out, and you basically have a few weeks of glory, and then it's over. And so I said, I just don't feel it. I just don't want to work on anything. And months went by, and then the pandemic hit.
Right.
And months into the quarantine and the pandemic, I still didn't want to do anything. And then one day I just felt like noodling again, and I started working on stuff. And I made a concerted effort to keep this new album to 12 songs, because I could have easily done what I usually do, which is about 14 songs or more. But I just feel people really don't want to hear that many songs anymore. Attention spans just aren't what they used to be. And the traditional album when I was growing up was 12 songs, and then there were the English Beatle albums sometimes were 14 songs, and that's where that came from. I was kind of just paying homage to the 14-song Beatle albums, but this new album is the first album I put out with 12 songs. Like I said, there's a lot more that I could have put out. There's songs that were of the same caliber, I think, of the ones we used, but I think people will just appreciate a dozen songs and listen to it, hopefully, as an album.
Yeah, it's interesting the like attention span towards full albums and now singles, and like the change between that, and even like the attention to like detail, like coming from big bands, right? There's a lot going on, and even with like bands like the Byrds and like these folk pop bands, there's a lot of detail and stuff going on, and like chordal movements, and like it's not just a straight beat with a kind of a singular melody with not too much harmonic value going on or changes, which is okay. Simple is probably the best when it comes to conveying yourself. But it's interesting how the amount of length, or at least a length of a piece, has dwindled down to almost like a song.
Right. I agree with that. I just think each individual song you work on gets whatever treatment it's
Right.
deemed to get. It's like some songs can be 2 chords and be totally effective, and some songs I have 12 chords and
Right.
all kinds of harmonies and and interweaving parts, more complex.
And it's I don't know. It's interesting. I just, I guess the whole comparison of the length of the album is where I was kind of going with it, and then kind of got tangled in my own uh, chordal rant. But so the new album's Copious Notes, and
Yes.
so what's are you still doing the Kickstarter? What's or is that
Yeah. We
okay?
have the Kickstarter is about halfway through, and we're doing, well, I'm pretty sure we're going to reach our goal and get that out to all the people that contributed to that.
Was
So
I
that's
got the
exciting.
yeah I got the advance on Copious Notes, and the song Greater Good, the last one on the record.
Uh-huh.
That's a ripper, man. That's such a good song.
Oh, you have the music? Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh,
Yeah,
Howard must have sent that.
yeah. Yeah, man. It holds up. It's interesting. The last two records, right, are pretty kind of straightforward. Of at least Copious Notes, and where's that coming from? Is it Copious Notes? Is it like, what's the story behind the title?
Copious Notes. Well, Copious Notes is, I don't know if you're aware, is a kind of a cliche saying, from when people are taking notes, say in a college course,
Mm,
they're sitting in a lecture room and they're just writing a lot of notes. They usually refer to them as copious notes, just meaning a lot
yeah,
of taking of notes. And I just was thinking about the double meaning of notes, where you're writing notes in whatever language you're writing the notes in, and then there's musical notes.
right. That's cool.
So I just
That's
thought it
really
was
cool.
kind of a little pun on the old saying copious notes, but thinking about musical notes. It's just, another one of my silly puns.
But it
To
makes you
seem like,
think, what is a note? Because even within music, it's defined in multiple ways, right? You got the rhythmic value of a note, like an eighth note or a quarter note, and then you got the pitch
right.
value of an
Yeah,
A
yeah.
or B flat. And like how one word describes multiple things in multiple fields. That's cool.
Yeah, and then even the word copious has several meanings, because I looked it up afterwards, and not only means a large amount, it also means thoughtful, and has a couple other meanings that kind of can apply to music, so it just seemed to work. That's a nice title.
No, it's a great title, and it's a great batch of tunes. Um,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't even aware they had the music. I forgot Howard
he's on it. Howard's on it.
has access to that stuff. Not too many people have it.
Well, it's not going anywhere. It's great. Um, but what I was going to bring up was like compared to the few albums that came before, you have like a one album that is like mostly like a piano record, like and before Pop Circles. I'm trying to remember the title of it. It's
Oh,
escaping.
Tears.
Tears, and
Tears,
like
yeah.
yeah, and it's an interesting like process of like kind of building up to this back to like this kind of like song cycle in a way. Was that kind of part of like the depletion you kind of felt like or exhaustion of like, or was it just the burnout of constantly turning stuff out? Because your career has been nonstop, like as far as writing and like 14 songs and the amount of detail you give to each of those songs isn't that's exhausting. Like that's nonstop hustling.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it doesn't feel that way to me, but I don't know. The record Tears was just a kind of thematic, I guess, what do they call it? A concept album, they used to call it. I was trying to tell a story with the songs in a kind of semi-chronicle order, and most of the songs I was coming up with were piano-oriented, so between that and trying to orchestrate them, it just had a different production value than some of my more kind of pop albums.
Right. So it's like a linear
And
narrative in the you
but you
get
know what I do a lot that um, is a good trick. I'm not the only one who does this, but I write a lot on piano and then put it all on guitar.
okay. Interesting.
And it's funny. I just heard this story from Peter Asher talking about when Paul McCartney lived at his house in London, and him, Paul and John were down in the basement, and they wrote "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on piano. I always thought, wow, I always thought that was such a guitar song because there's only guitar on the record, but it was written on the piano, and I'm thinking, God, it's so interesting that they had this song they wrote on piano, and then when they went to record it, there's no piano. They just turned it all over to the guitar. And so I've been doing that. I started doing that before I heard that story, but it is a good way to kind of keep things fresh, because you're going to write chord progressions on the piano that you would never think to do on guitar, and vice versa.
Right. Yeah.
So when you switch it over to the other instrument, it gets kind of interesting.
Right. No, that's especially with piano, because inversions and like spelling out chords are so different than on guitar. Guitar is very blocky. Guitar is very like,
Yeah.
here's your G, here's your, it's the same shape as your C, and you shift it. Where on piano,
Yeah.
you're thinking about each note. And like, almost coming from a drummer's perspective, I've noticed more drummers take to the piano than guitar. And I think that is that like ambidextrous movement of two hands, and like there's something about just the rhythmic component, I think. Does
Yeah, well,
that,
technically, the piano is a percussion instrument.
it makes sense, because, and that makes sense why drummers take to it more than.
Yeah, I definitely took to it as a drummer, and I really worked at it to get independence between my left and right hand,
Oh, interesting.
so that at times I can use individual fingers in my left hand that are kind of strolling around instead of just playing chords or fifths,
Right.
while the right hand is doing something else. And it makes the piano part a little more expressive and
Is that, did you like,
interesting.
because you played with you did some piano like gigs, you played with Benny King, which is
Yeah, yeah.
rad. Was that like a tour? Was that a show? How'd that happen?
No, it was just some recording projects.
Oh, okay. Cool. And how did he reach out to you, or were you like, how'd that
No, it was
happen?
just, I just was part of the band that was doing this project.
Oh, okay. Okay. And was that like in between like the Doughboys, like
Oh, yeah, it was
kind of,
way out. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember exactly when that was, but
okay.
it just,
Cool. Is that the same like kind of thing that happened with Brian Wilson, or how playing with him come about?
yeah, that was a couple, no, that wasn't recording. That was a couple live gigs
Oh, okay.
where he came to New York to do some shows, and I got hired.
Nice. That had to be crazy, especially like so
Yeah,
much.
because he's one of my heroes, and yeah, I got to spend some time and chat and play the music. Yeah, it was a real thrill.
That's
I'm
amazing.
such a fan.
Was there, I mean, with a guy like that, I can't imagine him being, I can't imagine interaction with someone like Wilson and not having like a lesson come from that, even if it's like a simple thing. Was there any like the lessons from playing with him that you adapted to your career post?
Um, well, the thing mainly that struck me was his, and I mean, he's a unique personality, and he's got his issues that are like his own personal
Right.
business that I wasn't going to get into, but he just seemed very enthusiastic about certain things musically. When he heard something, he would turn around to me and make a comment about what I was doing in a very complimentary way, and I was so thrilled because it was Brian Wilson saying something
Yeah,
nice
that's
about
crazy.
what I was, contributing to a song that he's probably played, hundreds and hundreds of times, and so that was a thrill.
Amazing. That's just the get the gig and the get positive feedback from that. That's amazing. Like, there's no
Yeah, it
coming
was,
down from that.
right. That's true.
So to kind of go back to Link Wray, like that, what a cool dude that guy is. Like, how'd that come around? Like, especially for drums. Dun 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 dun. Rumble is such a drum song as much as it
Yeah,
is a
I know.
guitar song. But
I moved down to Maryland, and I was looking for work, and the Washington Post had their classified section, and I was looking to see if there's anything for a drummer. And I see this ad, didn't say who it was for. I just, basically the kind of typical, drummer needed for a gig or whatever. And so I called, and turned out to be Link Wray. And I didn't, being from New Jersey, I didn't even realize that Virginia was right there. I was like right next to Maryland, and to me, Virginia sounds like the deep South.
right.
But it's right. It was literally, 10 minutes away from where we were living, near Washington, D.C. And so I drove down to Virginia, went to Link's place, and auditioned, and he was, seeing a bunch of people, and I got the gig. And it was just, again, I honestly wasn't that familiar with what he
Right.
did. I knew Rumble, of course,
Yeah.
luckily. But, he was a little, before my time, and I didn't really know all the albums or the lesser-known songs. Rumble is one of those iconic things that you just hear and know about. And so when we played Rumble, I knew what to do, and the rest of the songs, because that's got that kind of like 6/8 kind of thing, and the other songs are more just straight 4/4 and straight ahead, so I could just fake my way through them.
So
But for him, it was all about the energy. He just wanted a lot of power and energy, and I just did my best to. And I had my big 28-inch bass drum.
there you go. Match
My
grip.
Woodward.
Here we go.
Yeah, I did a lot of match grip playing with him.
Wow. What was the take? Was there any lessons from Link Wray? That
Any
profound.
lessons?
Yeah, like that profoundly shifted.
There were a lot of stuff from Link. He's very nice to me, and the main thing that I remember is the sound that he got, which just was so pleasant to the ear, because it was like this big power chord, but you could hear each string and each note glisten very clearly and independently, as well as the kind of grizzle of the power chord. And I never heard anybody get that sound before.
Yeah, he definitely had his own tone, for sure.
Yeah, it was a very exciting sound out of the amp. And I can't recall if he even had any boxes on the floor, but it was definitely some kind of Ampeg amp, and he was playing a Gibson SG. I remember that. And it's very rewarding to play drums to. It was just bass, drums, and guitar. It was a power trio, which leaves a lot of space.
It's amazing. That's so cool. So when you moved to Maryland, you met Nancy there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And she played in a few groups, right? There was the all female group.
Yeah.
What was the
Cheap
name of that?
Perfume.
I couldn't. What was it?
Cheap Perfume.
Cheap Perfume. I was trying to find her bands, but I couldn't find it. Okay. And
Yeah,
how'd you
I don't know
guys
how
meet?
much stuff they put out, but they were doing really well in the kind of later new wave punk era, when CBGBs and Max's Kansas City
Okay.
were the big spots, and they were headlining. I wasn't around at that time. I was out in California when they were really hitting their stride.
Gotcha. Okay. And were you recording out there, or were you touring with a group?
I was playing in a band called Cooper Dodge, which
Okay.
was a kind of like a folk rock kind of band that was playing steadily out there, and it was fronted by two singer-songwriters who were very, very talented and kind of wrote kind of in a folky style, kind of Americana, almost, I guess you could say.
Was that the vibe of the L.A., like more laid back, and on the East Coast they're punking it up type deal?
No, I thought Cooper Dodge was a little out of step with what was happening. I did it because it was a steady gig, so I had an income. I'd never really, lived in California before, and I thought it would be fun. And they were one of these bands that was, very good. I wasn't even singing or anything in the band. I was just playing drums. And they were, one of, hundreds of groups that were looking for a record deal. And they were always on the verge of possibly getting one, but it never happened. But really, at that same time, the power pop new wave thing was happening.
Okay. Is that where
and
you...
I had already done a similar thing when I was living in Washington with this band I had called The Rage, which was the first band that I really fronted as a guitar player and singer. And I started writing in that more kind of melodic pop style that had been sort of suppressed before. So that was the beginning of that.
Was there so kind of going from like a drumming gig to a lead gig, like was there a certain laid backness to the drumming gig, like I got this, and like a certain like kind of like a fudge, like how do I handle this type of gig, or did you feel like it was a natural switch to be able to?
When I went up front?
Yeah.
Front band? At first it was disconcerting, for sure. I definitely had that I got this kind of feeling when I'm back on the drums. So to this day, I still consider that my main instrument. And, I mean, I'm always a nervous wreck playing live. I have terrible stage fright, but less so, I guess, as a drummer. Yeah, no, I'm up front. I'm terrified. It's, especially, those clubs where you couldn't hear yourself sing, the monitors weren't happening, and the band would just be so much louder than you were expecting, or whatever monitors they had, it was all bass and drums, and you couldn't even, feel the musicality anymore.
Yeah, that definitely does make a difference when you can't hear where you're at, and like when your voice is very dependent on feel.
I know. You wonder how these groups back in the '60s did it without monitors, but I used to hate. You'd go into the clubs and you rely on the house sound guy, and some of them were better than others, and some of them, they all like to crank up the bass drum really loud, and it got to the point where it was more oppressive than musical.
Right. Well, they're trying to get the people in.
Yeah,
you feel that bass come on in.
Man, they would pump that low end and kick drum so loud, it was dominating everything. And so those kind of gigs started to, get me a little jaded about playing the club scene, but you had to do it.
Right. Did you notice a coast-to-coast thing with the drum mix? I forget, I was talking with someone a while ago, and they noticed that more East Coast was drum and guitar heavy compared to West Coast.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe. I mean, you can't. It's hard to generalize.
Right.
I think it was just the individual soundmen. Some of them, but there definitely was a trend of really kicking up the low end to the point where it just got ridiculous. I mean, I've been to professional shows where I just sometimes had to leave because all I heard was boom, boom, boom.
Right.
This low kick drum and bass, and it's like, where's the music? I can't. I remember, getting so tired of that, and every now and then you'd go to a show, and the headliner would come on, and you'd go, here we go, we're going to get blasted. it would just sound like perfect. It would sound like a record. And he said, why can't they do this like all the time? For example, Nancy had never seen the Stones before, and we went to see them at Giant Stadium. And I thought they were going to come on and just be like, you know, so loud and laughing. And we were fairly close. And they came on, and it was like within the first 5 seconds, I knew they were going to sound just perfect because the way it was mixed was like a record.
Nice.
So it's like, duh, the magic's going to start.
Yeah. Is there like a with this like when you see a band like that and like well actually no let me rephrase that. How much of the Stones influenced the Doughboys? Because I definitely get some Stone vibes.
Oh, a lot. Yeah, the Doughboys were heavily, you know, our lead singer, Mike Scavone, is, you know, just a natural front man, and to, you know, most of these singers that, you know, were doing like a garage rock thing, Mick Jagger is the prototype. So he had a lot of that, along with, you know, a lot of other influences, but yeah, no, to this day, I have a great appreciation of the Stones. They're just amazing. Charlie Watts is
Right.
incredible.
In the Pocket. That dude's a living metronome.
Yeah. I know, it's just like the other day, you know, we can't go to the gym right now because of the quarantine and stuff, so every morning I DJ for Nancy so she can dance to get exercise, and I mainly, you know, play like early rock and roll, 50s
Right.
and 60s stuff. And I was playing the Stones, and she's just in the middle of dancing, just said, Charlie Watts is just driving this thing like unbelievably. It's like he's so in command, and he's great. I mean, it's Ringo, the same thing. I mean, they just were in the pocket and
There's
recorded
something to the simple.
flawlessly.
Yeah. Something to the simple.
Yeah.
Was the take it? Did she dig the Stones from seeing them from the first time? Did she get it?
To Nancy or?
Yeah, Nancy, because that you said that was the first time you guys
she
went.
she was blown away because she had never seen him before, and I remember at one point I leaned over to her and I said, "It's all about Charlie, because it's all about Charlie Watts, because you could really hear him and you could hear how he was propelling the whole thing."
Yeah, I was supposed to see the Stones right before the shutdown in June. I had tickets, and I was really bummed because that would be the first time I got to see them, aside from like live videos and stuff.
Yeah.
But kind of on the topic of venues, I've noticed you guys with the Doughboys and solo career, Arlene's Grocery. You guys seem to frequent there. Is that like a?
Oh, that Club Arlen Grocery.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was in the neighborhood where where we live, and so it was easy to book, and it was a nice sounding room.
Right. I play in a band called Sea Level, and letter C dash. I know there's an SEA level. Figured that out a little too late.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But right before the shutdown, we did a weekend out of town trip, and one of the places we played was Arlene's Grocery, and
Oh, okay.
so that was like the week before the shutdown. We came right back right when it shut down, and like that was our first like real good, like when you play out of town enough, eventually you start to build the crowd. Like we finally had a good night in New York, and it is so cool, and then everything stops just about.
Yeah, I know.
But that's a cool venue, man. And it's got a
Yeah,
cool
it is.
room. Did you have to bring a kit?
Huh?
I know they're pretty like use our stuff.
Yeah, no, we shot a video there,
Right.
like a live video. For that, I brought my own drums, but if we just did a gig there, it would just be the house kit.
Gotcha. Cool. Saves on the trip. Like that whole like a few blocks. There's a couple venues there that are really that's a really happening spot.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on now, but yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Everything in New York is changed. It's we're just kind of waiting to see if and when things are going to get back to so-called normal.
Right. Yeah, or what the new one looks like. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
weird because when I went out there, people were like kind of wearing masks and kind of like at the end of the night trying to shake hands with the owner. They're like, yeah, yeah, cool. I'm like, all right. I'm like, everything hadn't hit yet. And New York was kind of prepping for it. And it was really weird time to play because like, everyone's by each other and stuff, but everyone's acting kind of weird. It was a real weird
Mm.
beginning of that turnover in a weird place to see it comparative to Ohio. Um,
Yeah, I bet.
you know what I mean? Like there's a lot more space in Ohio. Um, so with the recording of Copious Notes and Living Room, what are the because both of those were or yeah, Living Room was all done at home, right?
Well, no, living room was done somebody else's living room.
Okay. Okay, so it
That
wasn't
was originally recorded with analog tape.
okay.
That was before all this digital stuff. So
Because I was
it was just called living room because it was in the living room, but it
right.
wasn't my living room.
Okay. So the drums were recorded there then.
Yeah.
Nice. What I was going to ask was what kind of being the start of the DIY recording career compared to where it is now, comparing the process of Copious Notes and Living Room, is there a lot of similarities or a lot of differences that you've noticed from going from the rip to where you are now, tracking and writing wise in the home?
Well, most of it's really more about the technology that's changed. As far as coming up with the songs and the parts and the ideas, that's pretty much remained the same as far as just a generalization of what you have to do. I mean, ideas change and hopefully you improve with time, but the technology's so radically different now. And you can do things you couldn't do that. Sometimes the limitations actually were assets
Right.
because you were forced to limit yourself. I mean, Living Room was done on 8 tracks. And that was it. You're done.
Yeah.
And so we had to come up with ideas that were going to work, and then you had to stop. Now you could go on forever, and we're just talking about this in one of the videos on our Kickstarter campaign. Nancy says to me that Leonardo da Vinci once said that art is never finished, only abandoned.
Yeah.
And it's so true because that's how I feel. I just can't stop myself. I'll start working on something and I just want to keep going because I think I'm going to get it better. And sometimes you're not getting it better. And sometimes you are, but sometimes you just got to stop.
Right.
Or you need somebody else to make you stop.
And that's where Nancy steps in?
Yeah, she steps in. But I'd probably still be working on it. No.
That's what a beautiful partnership. That's so cool. That's so cool that
Yeah, it really is. Besides all the other good stuff, but the whole musical partnership is definitely
right.
a marvel to me because I would sound horrible without her because I don't have the patience or frankly the ears that she does. So.
Right. Well, that kind of shows you how important the engineer or the producer or the sound guy is to making the core of it sound right, and like to have someone be like, do it again, and like
yeah, I mean, and then on top of that, we used to mix our own stuff, but then at one point we decided, let's get a pair of fresh ears,
right,
to mix all these tracks because we're so burnt on recording and so kind of inside the whole thing that we can't be objective. So we got a really talented mixing engineer to mix our stuff, and we've been using him on everything since, Tony Lewis. And so he deserves a lot of the credit because he's getting all these raw tracks, and then he mixes them, and then with my approval, we get it done.
Right.
You know, we go back and forth until everybody's happy.
Yeah, and that's a whole art in itself, is putting the colors on the canvas. On the canvas. I don't know why I'm slurring my words today. On the canvas, you know, seeing the thing as like one big thing, because you know, you get the tunnel vision on the take and the conveyance of the
that's
emotion
it.
of the song. So to have like
The
that,
tunnel
someone who
vision
can do
thing.
that, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's such a load off, because I used to hate sitting there, because there's so much like grunt work and prep
Right.
work in the mixing process, and to me it's just a total bore.
I feel it.
I just want to hear the finished product.
Yeah. No, I
You know
feel.
what I mean? I don't have that whole technological desire to work on the stuff like that.
Right.
I just want to like hear the song back, see how it makes me feel, and then get it out for others to hear. But that said, I don't like to settle either. So, you know, we're going back and forth. He's down in New Jersey, and I'm in New York. So the mixes are getting sent back and forth, and he sends, and I say, you know, I like it, but I think it needs this, this, and this, and so he'll work on it some more, and we keep tinkering, and
Yeah.
eventually you got to stop.
Yeah.
You know, I never get it to the point where I'm totally happy. You just can't. You know, it never ends up being as good as you thought it was going to be. But that said, you know, you got to kind of feel like you did the best you could and move on.
Right. Well, then the new batch of tunes comes and you start it all over again, and it's
Yeah, I know. Well, that's how I felt after Pop Circles. I just like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too much work. But it just kind of came back, and I did it again. You know, not sure what I'm going to do next, but at least I have 14. It's a nice even number. I didn't want to end with 13 for sure.
right.
So,
Go out even, broke even.
yeah, you know, a nice 14 is a nice even number. But I've been having fun with these songs because we, as part of the Kickstarter campaign, offered unplugged versions and a cappella
that's cool.
versions and instrumental versions. And that to me is more fun than the finished ones. I love just, you know, working like some of these I got down to just piano and one single vocal.
Nice. Is that kind of
And
like
it's
the
kind of-
process for playing live, working backwards like that?
Say that again?
Is that kind of like a process for doing it live? Once you record it, get the whole thing, like the lush harmonies, the wall of sound, which you do a really good job at incorporating with a lot of your tunes. But when you play live, it's hard to recreate that. So is that kind of a similar process as
That's
learning?
true. Well, I mean, I'm not really planning on it. There's no place to play right now anyway.
Right.
So I'm not really thinking about that, but that's an interesting point. I would say I always looked at the live thing as a totally different animal than
Okay.
recording. I never tried to replicate live. But that said, in the band that I had, there were 4 strong
Okay.
singers that knew harmony, so I could do, you know, 4 vocals at once, and we did a lot of that. And, you know, it's never going to sound like double track like the record, but
Yeah. But
it
the
can.
part. Okay.
But-
That's cool.
but,
So you're reworking these piano arrangements and these a cappella arrangements of everything?
Yeah, this is for people that donate a certain amount of money on the Kickstarter campaign will get
Right.
these versions. And they're really interesting to me. You know, the a cappella stuff, you can really make out, you know, parts that you can't really decipher in the full finished mix. So that's fun. Yeah, for people that are into that. And, you know, some of them, you know, really hold up as an a cappella song. Some the breakdowns, like just like 1 or 2 instruments and the vocals are nice. Because you hear things. I mean, one of the things that always drove me crazy is we put a lot of effort into each part, and some of the parts, you know, you can't make out in the finished mix because
Right.
they're working against other things. And
You gotta balance it
they
out.
become, like you said, like a walls of sound that certain things have to give. So it's nice. I think people would be amazed at the stuff that's on records that they don't truly hear because of the mix. Every now and then you'll see something on YouTube where somebody's breaking down one of their songs, each part, and you hear things that, oh my gosh, like there's some channel on YouTube that has the Beatle vocals isolated.
Yeah, I think I followed that
And
guy.
I hear stuff that I thought I knew for sure, and it's like, oh, he's singing a totally different note than I realized.
Right, because when it's
After
all
all these years.
mixed, it's hard to break that wall of, is that coming from the guitar or is that the vocal? Like when it's
Yeah.
that much in the background, you know what I mean? Or I mean, I guess the Beatles would be hard to say that with, but it is really cool. There's something, seeing it all come together is cool too. There's something rewarding about putting the Lego pieces together and seeing the castle or whatever. But to do
Yeah.
that sonically, you don't usually only get the full product. So that's a really cool thing to offer for a Kickstarter campaign, like the see the inside baseball of everything.
Yeah, it's fun to put together too. These we're mixing ourselves, and we're just getting. At least I don't know how Nancy feels. I'm getting a lot of pleasure out of just hearing the piano on its own, for instance, where you
Right.
can hear exactly what I'm playing. There's songs where you can't even hear the piano, but it's in there.
Right.
Because most of these songs start with the piano as my guide, and so we send them down to our mixing engineer. But a lot of times the piano ends up sort of back in the mix, and the guitars take over, which is cool. But
Yeah.
it's just nice to have a version where you hear the piano. Like you mentioned, the Greater Good, I just did like a breakdown of just the piano and vocal.
Oh, cool.
I'm trying to decide for the unplugged one whether to put the harmonies in, but I'm leaning towards just a solo vocal and piano, as if it's just some guy sitting down
Right. I
singing.
mean, I think the harmonies on that song are sweet. So, but I think that the song itself holds up. So, like as a solo piece, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'm really liking it, just piano and vocal, and it's got a kind of almost a gospel feel about it.
So I
when you hear
imagine
it like that.
like a song like "Nearly There." I bet that'd be a really cool a cappella version because it comes in with like
It
the
is, yeah. I'm very excited about that one because that has parts. I mean, that's one of the most complicated harmonies I've ever done. You can't really appreciate it in the finished mix because it just sounds like a kind of a pop harmony. But
right.
when you hear the parts, they're really, even for me, like totally unique and different than anything I've ever done. And you don't really hear it until you hear the a cappella. I have the kind of breakdown unplugged version right now
Yeah.
with all the harmonies in, and that's another one I'm debating whether to leave them in or not for the people that get the unplugged version, because they'll hear it in the a cappella one, but they just won't hear the chords behind it. So it's a trade-off. But I was just kind of like surprised because I forgot what some of these harmonies are so convoluted because they're coming from the piano part.
Right.
A lot of times, like when you're playing and your right hand is playing the melody with the harmonies built in on your right hand,
Yeah.
they're playing harmonies that just wouldn't naturally come to you as a harmony singer or
Right.
somebody that's into pop music. But they sound really nice on the piano, and then when you go to sing them, they sound so weird when they're on their own, but as part of the group, it works. I found that really an interesting example. It's one of the few times where I just was really surprised at the notes and the harmony on Nearly There,
Right.
which is the opening song on the new album.
It's an interesting perspective, right? Because like certain notes, especially if they're laid out on a piano, right? Like a lot of country like pianos will add that ninth, right there at the beginning, do like the fill. I don't know what you call that fill, but there's that country thing where they roll in the ninth, and that's a really dissonant sound, right? But when it's played with everything, it's really nice. And if you take that second and bump it up to the ninth, it's a beautiful sound. Where it's a really interesting perspective of how to look at things. Like, is it terrifying or is it beautiful? I guess depends the angle of it.
Yeah, it's just the human brain hears sounds and either accepts it or, we sometimes, Nancy and I will discuss just why is it that people like 1, 4, 5, like in the blues.
Right.
It just sounds, why are those chords the ones that sound right to the human ear? You can't really explain it. It just does.
It's a really interesting phenomena, right? Like the resolve, right, of the 5 to 1. Yeah. How, like, in our culture, how that the brain internalizes that as such a rewarding thing to hear, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, why is the 5 chord feel like kind of the N chord,
right?
Like that.
And
then
like,
why is the 4 chord sounds like, a passing chord to the 5 or back to the 1. It's just like unexplainable. It just does.
Right. It's
fascinating.
Fascinating.
Maybe somebody can explain it to me, but because if you tried to do a blues, going from, say, C to an E major,
right,
it would just sound horrible.
Right.
To an A, it wouldn't work.
Right. Or a 3-6-2, like progression
whatever,
in the blues.
Anything other, occasionally you'll hear the 2 chord in the blues, or even
like the swing
the
stuff,
relative minor or something, or the relative major, even like in the key of C. You could sometimes have a D 7th and an A in there, but they're a little more sophisticated blues. But usually all you need is the 1, 4, and 5, and you're totally happy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I guess there's like a whole ratio principle, right, to the scale, the notes within the scale, like singular, like if you were just playing a 1, 4, 5, and a more consonant or more consonant sounds have a equal ratio, and I guess that has something to do with how the brain perceives it as a rewarding sound, right? And a dissonant, like a minor, or has like a more uneven ratio of the note. So neurologically, that's kind of a thing that factors into why that works, but that doesn't really factor culturally, you know what I mean, to why...
You're making my brain hurt. But all I can say is if you say so.
I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe you're right. It's a little too complicated for me.
Stuff I've dove into. It's interesting. I agree with you. I find that so fascinating. And you only need those 3 chords, and you can get rid of the middle one and just do a 1 and 5, and you can have the most rocking song. You can have the most meaningful song to someone's life with just 2 chords. It's so cool.
Well, look at "Everyday People" by Sly and the Family Stone.
Right.
1 chord, and the bass
just the walk-up
only
thing.
plays 1 note.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't even play any sort of melodic line. It's just staying on, and you never question it, or it never gets boring. I don't know why. It's just, I guess, the melody on top and the groove. It's all working. I mean, that's unusual, but it just goes to show how it can be done if you have the right elements.
Right. And I guess those other elements are really what brings it out. Or even if you look at "So What" by Miles Davis, there's 2 chords. And it's a half step, you know what I mean? It's not even the 1-5 thing. It's just kind of floating around 1.
Yeah.
But
occasionally you'll get a song where they never hit the 1 chord.
Yeah.
But that's the key that it's in, which is really weird.
That is really weird.
I'm trying to think of that song by Fleetwood Mac. What's that song there? And the one about thunder only happens. What's that song? I forget the name of it. Well, that's not the name of it. That's
Changes? Is that it?
Dreams.
Dreams.
Yeah, whatever it is. But it's just going, I think, from the 4 to the 5 over and over.
Right.
4 to 5. And
right.
It's never hitting the 1, but
it's in that key.
It's in that key, and that
I think
or
it's
at
C.
least a musician would know.
Right.
And there's something very compelling about that.
Yeah, it's almost.
I mean,
I
that's
guess.
unusual, but it's just kind of another example of how the human brain processes these things. It sounds right, even to the layman and to the musician. It's just they're not going to the root. They're just floating in this other zone that's just leaving you hanging, but it feels good.
In a dream, I guess, right? It fits the song.
Yeah, maybe it's got that's right.
Do you
Got a
ever like?
dream-like quality.
Sorry, over the phone it's kind of. But yeah, it has the dream like it's weird. Do you do that sometimes with songwriting? Do you take like a weird like music approach like that? Has there been any songs like where you've attempted?
Sometimes I try to do something different, or again, I don't let that dictate,
Right, right.
what I'm trying
The
to
feel.
accomplish, because I don't want to just do something for, trying to be clever. I try with each song to make it move me in some way that makes sense to me.
Right.
I always say to Nancy, if the song is moving me and or you, there's got to be another human. We're all human. There's got to be at least one other person out there in the world that's going to have that effect on them, and that's all I care about.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's coming from the conveyance of your emotion, and that's what's
I'd
going
like it to be
resonate.
millions of people, but I'm not greedy. So if there's one person even that just gets the same feeling that I got, I'll feel like mission accomplished.
Cool. I got a couple more questions. I really appreciate your time. I know we've been talking for a minute.
Yeah, I got to run soon. Go.
Okay. Mary from the Shangri-Las. What was it like working with her?
Oh, that was a delight. Very nice person, very talented singer, and it was a fun gig, and it was a little mind-boggling because I was never hired before as a lead guitar player, and I was the only guitar player, so I had to handle all the hit songs that she had, plus her new stuff, and she wanted me to replicate the guitar parts and solos that were on her album, her recent album. So that was a challenge for me because, like I say, my main instrument is the drums, and I always looked at the guitar and the piano as tools to write songs. And then when I started to front the band, I said, oh, geez, I guess I better start to really learn how to do this a little bit more proficiently. So I tried to get better on the guitar. The piano, the keyboards, I start to get around pretty good. Because like I said, it's part of the percussion thing, so I got a little more confident with that. But the guitar is always, it's a hard instrument. And so, but I've got it to the point now where, as far as recording, I can, put down parts that work for the song.
Nice. And like, was it the process of doing that? Was that in between? Like, was it a tour with her? Or was it just a couple performances?
Oh, with Mary, it was live gigs.
Okay.
She just had come out with a record and needed a backing band, so I got I don't know why why they hired me to play the guitar, but
That's awesome.
I was flattered, and it was a challenge, and I said I'd like to do that. I love her music, and she was great to work with, so it all worked out.
Nice. And you worked with Jonathan Richman from Modern Lover? How was that?
Yeah. That was just a gig that,
Okay.
live gig that a drummer, was needed, and I got hired.
Nice. Different style, though, right?
Yeah, he's got his thing, and I did the best I could.
That's sick. That's cool. Just the repertoire within your career, they have all these songwriting, just like to be able to write as much as you have and record it to the quality and sonically and lyrically as you do, and to be able to do all these live gigs with multiple bands and handle all this is very, very inspiring. I personally have trouble saying no to things, and was there a point? I guess my last question is: was there a point where that became a skill set to say no to things, or are you still working on? Am I going to be saying yes to things forever?
Uh, well, things have kind of ground to a halt because of the pandemic. So as far as offers to play live, that's kind of non-existent right now. And as far as my own thing, I always could say yes or no to myself as far
Fair.
as if I want to keep moving on or not. But I certainly don't do it for the money. So every now and then, if the feeling comes back, I'll start noodling again and see what happens.
Oh, and one last. Do you still have that Kent drum kit?
Oh no, that's long gone. That's long gone. I had my same Ludwig kit that I had as a kid for years, and then when we moved into our new apartment, my floor tom went missing somewhere in the move. We never found it, and so I started looking around to replace it, and I decided to just get a new set. So I got not a new set, but I got a vintage Ludwig kit.
Nice, with a
And
28-inch bass, and it's
no, 24. I went to the 24s, but I started going a little crazy, and I ended up having three Ludwig, a Slingerland, and a Rogers vintage, 1960s four-piece kit, all with 24-inch bass drums and double floor toms.
cool.
Got them, off of eBay.
Um,
But now, of course, they're just sitting in the closet. But
all right. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me and taking all this time to
David,
chat.
it was our pleasure, and my pleasure, and I appreciate all the interesting questions and insights you had. So
Well,
it was,
thanks. That means a lot. I
very
tried to
cool.
do a fair amount of work into all these interviews, so I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, no, and I'm excited that you have the album. I feel this way about all my stuff, but especially this new album. Just got to give a few listens, and it'll sink in. All of a sudden, I hope
Yeah.
at a certain point, the second or third listening, chord progressions and melodies and things will start to click and make sense to the listener.
Is it?
Some of them will on the first listen, but
Yeah.
there's certain songs I know take a few listenings to really hit, and make sense. So
Right.
give it
Or even
some
just
listens.
no, definitely. Like I've given it a few spins before we chatted, but even just
Oh,
like as you recorded it. How many times do you gotta listen to it to accept it when it's all done, or do you never accept
yeah,
it?
no, I'm burnt out. I mean, you listen to it hundreds and hundreds of
Right.
times. You're working on it all the time, and it's just like the minutia
Right.
of all these parts.
How
But
did how's the bass sound? Is the snare is that now out of phase? What like?
oh,
What?
yeah,
I don't
I
get
mean,
this.
it's there's endless, because
Right.
especially in today's process, there's so many layers that you can put into these things.
Right.
A lot of these songs have so many good. I mean, I overdo it a lot, but there's just so many guitars in there and all kinds of little things in the back
Well,
that
that,
you don't even hear. You just kind
yeah.
of feel them more than you hear them.
Yeah, but that makes
But
it
it's all fun.
you know what I mean? That makes the thing. You're trying to convey the feeling and like those
Yeah,
little things
I
bring that
know.
out. Ah,
There's
awesome, my
little
friend.
tight little tidbits in there that you hope somebody will hear, maybe on the third listen or fourth listen. Oh, I didn't know that was in there. I didn't.
Right. Well,
So
and
it's kind of a fun thing with pop music. You can put all that stuff in there. Yeah, you got to try to leave some space and some air as well. So that's the challenge.
yeah, no, definitely is to build atmosphere and take away and like and that's hard to do because you can always add something to highlight something
Yeah,
else and
well, a lot of it is, like I said earlier, trial and error. I do put things in there that don't work out and that we end up not using all the time. You know,
But it's like you don't know that until the piano track's back in, or it's
yeah,
fun.
you know, you
It's so
got
fun, and it's a lot.
yes,
It's overbearing, but when it all said is done, it see like I've recorded a few, nowhere near 14 albums, but I've recorded a lot. For what my schedule admits, and like just doing that process of listening back, and like it's overwhelming, and then but it's also fun. Like when everything's like almost done, when you're doing the little things, where you're like, yeah, let's add some horns on that. Like that's the most
yeah,
fun when everything's like the hard work's done.
yeah. Well, I really enjoyed working with the real extra instruments on this album because
Yeah.
there's no synthesized anything. Everything you hear, the horns are all real people playing, and all the string parts are real. There's no keyboard strings, so it's kind of got this organic feeling. I played some of the songs with strings to a friend, and he said, "God, where'd you get that string sample? That's the best string sample ever." I said, "That's not a string sample.
That's
That's some woman playing violin and viola, and she just kind of multi-tracked herself to the point where she sounded like an orchestra."
yeah. There's something to definitely like the samples work, but there's something to someone actually doing it and being able to put their unique twist to it, even if they play
Yeah,
the part that is sampled out. There's something
the,
audibly human about it.
yeah, the woman who plays most of the strings on the album, we didn't even ask her to multi-track herself. I
Oh, cool.
sent out the parts, and she played each part 6 times.
Nice. So she really layered it up. She knew what you were gonna do.
Yeah, it got to the point where it's so creamy. I mean, it literally sounded like a string section of an orchestra, and I wasn't expecting that. But when I heard it, it's like I could not use it. It was it's so lush and nice, and I just said, "Yeah, the hell with the string quartet. Let's go with the New York Philharmonic.com."
That's awesome. Was
All right, David, I gotta run.
all right. Thank you so much,
Good
Richard. This has
talking to
been
you.
great. Likewise. I look forward to hopefully meeting you one day when I can go back to New York.